Welcome to the channel. If epic sci-fi stories are your thing, you've just found your new home. Subscribe, like, and share the adventure. The silence in the Galactic Council chambers had never felt so heavy. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood before 300 alien delegates, his human heart hammering against his ribs as he watched their varied forms shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some had tentacles that writhed with agitation, others possessed crystalline bodies that chimed discordantly, and a few displayed bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with what he'd learned to recognize as fear. He had just spoken 7 words. That would change everything. Earth's moon is not for sale. The Vorthan representative, a towering being with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, leaned forward. Human Morrison, you misunderstand the generosity of our offer. 100 billion credits for your satellite. Your species could purchase entire star systems with such wealth. Jake's jaw tightened. 3 months ago, he would have been amazed to stand in this chamber, representing humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. Now, after learning what these civilized species truly thought of his people, amazement had curdled into something far more dangerous. And what would you do with our moon? Jake asked, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with surprising steadiness. The Vorthan's translator device hummed. Extract its mineral wealth, naturally. The gravitational disruption to your planet would be ... manageable. Manageable. Jake thought of the tides that had shaped Earth's coastlines for millions of years, the delicate balance that had allowed life to flourish on his world. He thought of his daughter Lucy, only 8 years old, who loved to count craters on the moon's surface through her telescope. You're talking about destroying the gravitational stability that has protected Earth. For eons, Jake said. The answer is no. A ripple of what sounded like laughter echoed through the chamber. The Kef delegate, a being that resembled a massive jellyfish floating in a mobility tank, pulsed with bioluminescent amusement. Protect? Human, your species has existed for barely 200,000 years. You are infants playing with forces beyond your comprehension. Perhaps, Jake replied, feeling something cold and determined settle in his chest. But even infants can bite when cornered. The laughter died. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Zelarian ambassador, whose species had been humanity's first contact and supposed ally, stood with a sound like wind chimes. Jake, please reconsider. The Galactic Council has ways of acquiring what it needs. It would be unfortunate if Earth were declared a hostile territory. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jake looked around the chamber at these beings who commanded technologies that could reduce Earth to cosmic dust, who controlled trade routes spanning thousands of light years, who had casually discussed strip mining humanity's moon as if it were an empty asteroid. He thought of something his grandfather had told him during the old man's final days. Son, the measure of a man isn't what he does when he's strong. It's what he does when he's got nothing left but his principles. Jake. Morrison had never felt smaller or more alone. Humanity had one barely functional spaceship, no weapons that could threaten these cosmic powers, and a population that didn't even know this conversation was happening. They had nothing except the one thing these advanced civilizations had apparently forgotten how to value. Then I guess you'll have to declare us hostile, Jake said quietly. Because Earth's moon stays where it is. The chamber erupted in chaos. Translators overloaded as 300 different languages tried to process what had just happened. A species with Stone Age technology, relatively speaking, had just told the most powerful alliance in the galaxy to go to hell. And somewhere in that chaos, Jake Morrison realized he had just fired the first shot in a war humanity couldn't possibly win, unless, of course, They changed the rules of engagement entirely. The emergency session convened 6 hours later in a smaller chamber, one designed for what the Galactic Council euphemistically called compliance discussions. Jake had spent those 6 hours in what amounted to luxurious house arrest, with 2 Keth guards whose bioluminescent warnings pulsed ominously whenever he moved too quickly. Now he sat across from 5 beings who collectively commanded, "Enough." Firepower to glass 1,000 worlds like Earth. The Vorthan Admiral Corvex dominated one side of the triangular table. His 4 arms folded in a gesture Jake had learned indicated severe displeasure. Beside him, the crystalline Resonari delegate hummed at frequencies that made Jake's teeth ache, while the Zalarian diplomat Aaron looked genuinely pained by the situation. "Let us be clear about your position, Human Morrison," Admiral Corvex began, his translated voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your species possesses one marginally spaceworthy vessel, no significant military assets, and a population confined to a single world. Against this, you face the combined might of civilizations that have spanned the stars for millennia. Perhaps you would like to reconsider your earlier statement." Jake studied the faces or their alien equivalents around the table. These weren't evil beings, he realized. They were simply so far beyond humanity in technological terms that they had forgotten what it meant to struggle, to fight for survival with nothing but determination and ingenuity. "Tell me," Jake said, leaning forward, "what happened to the Terrash?" The question hit the room like a physical blow. The Resonary's humming stopped abruptly, while Aaron's normally flowing movements became rigid. Admiral Corvex's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. "The Terrash were a minor species that refused Council authority," Corvex said carefully. "They chose to resist rather than comply with galactic law. The result was regrettable. They were wiped out," Jake stated flatly. "Their homeworld is now a mining operation, and their entire civilization exists only in your historical databases. They were given every opportunity to integrate peacefully." The Resonari chimed, its crystalline form flickering with defensive patterns. "They chose warfare over wisdom." Jake nodded slowly. During his months on the Council station, he had researched every species that had ever been integrated into galactic civilization. The pattern was always the same: comply or die. Over 3 million years, the Galactic Council had encountered nearly 10,000 spacefaring civilizations. Only 400 remained as independent members. The rest had been absorbed, relocated, or eliminated. "Here's what I find interesting about the Terrash," Jake continued. "According to your own records, they fought for 18 years against Council forces. 18 years with technology barely more advanced than what we have now. They managed to destroy over 300 Council ships before you finally broke them." "Desperate savagery," Admiral Corvex growled. "They turned their own children into weapons. No civilized species would." "They fought for their home," Jake interrupted. "Just like humanity will fight for ours." Aaron finally spoke, her melodic voice carrying notes of genuine concern. "Jake, please understand, the Council doesn't wish to destroy humanity. Your species shows remarkable potential. But the moon contains trilithium deposits that could power defensive stations for a dozen systems on the frontier." "The needs of the many, the needs of the many," Jake repeated. "How wonderfully utilitarian. Tell me, Aaron, how many of your people died when the Council integrated the Zalarian Republic 2 centuries ago?" Her silence was answer enough. Jake stood, pacing to the chamber's single viewport. Outside, the Council station bustled with activity ships from 100 different worlds loading cargo, refueling, conducting the business of a galaxy-spanning civilization. It was magnificent and terrible, this casual display of power that dwarfed anything humanity had ever dreamed of achieving. "You know what I think happened to the Terrash?" Jake said, not turning from the viewport. "I think they scared you badly. A primitive species with obsolete weapons held off the mighty Galactic Council for nearly 2 decades. They proved that technology isn't everything. That desperation and ingenuity can level the playing field in ways your strategists never anticipated. The Terrash were an aberration, Admiral Korvax said, but Jake caught the slight uncertainty in the translation. Were they? Jake turned back to face the table. Or were they a preview? Because I've been doing some research during my time here. The Council has been expanding for 3 million years, absorbing species, growing stronger. But in all that time, expansion has been slowing. Fewer new civilizations join willingly. More resist. Your latest integration took 40 years to complete. The one before that took 60. It's almost as if the galaxy is learning. The chamber fell silent. Jake could hear the hum of the station's engines, the distant chatter of alien voices in the corridors beyond. You're teaching us to fear you, Jake continued quietly. And fear makes even the weakest creatures dangerous. The message from Earth arrived 37 hours later, transmitted on an old radio frequency that the Council's sophisticated monitoring systems had almost overlooked. Jake sat in his quarters, still under polite but firm guard, when Aaron arrived with a handheld device displaying the transmission. Your government has been busy, she said, her translator carrying what Jake had learned to recognize as carefully controlled alarm. Jake read the message twice, then set the device down with hands that weren't quite steady. President Hayes had been briefer than usual. Ambassador Morrison, effective immediately. Earth's moon is designated a protected heritage site under international law. Any attempt to mine, alter, or remove Luna will be considered an act of war against all Earth nations. The Luna Defense Protocol is now active. Make them understand, Jake. We're not backing down. Luna Defense Protocol? Aaron asked, settling into the chair across from him with movements that seemed less graceful than usual. Jake smiled for the first time in days. Something my species is particularly good at, making the best of a bad situation. What Jake didn't tell her was that the Luna Defense Protocol was brilliant in its desperate simplicity. Earth's governments had spent 48 hours retrofitting every nuclear missile, space probe, and communications satellite with remote detonation capabilities. They had also begun loading cargo ships with nuclear waste, broken electronics, and every piece of toxic debris they could find. If the Galactic Council wanted Luna, they would have to deal with several hundred improvised nuclear devices scattered across its surface, along with enough radioactive and electronic waste to make mining operations impossible for centuries. Humanity was essentially threatening to poison their own moon rather than let it be harvested. Your species has surrounded their satellite with weapons, Aaron observed. Primitive nuclear devices, according to our scans. Do you understand what this means? It means we're no longer just saying no, Jake replied. We're making no stick. The door chimed and Admiral Korvax entered without waiting for permission. His 4 arms gestured with agitation, and his translator crackled with static that Jake had learned indicated barely controlled fury. Human Morrison, your government has committed an act of unprecedented foolishness. They have weaponized their own moon against potential mining operations. This is a direct challenge to Council authority that cannot be ignored. Jake stood slowly, feeling the weight of history settling on his shoulders. Admiral, let me ask you something. In 3 million years of Council expansion, has any species ever successfully defended their homeworld against your forces? Several have tried, none succeeded. But the Terrash came close, didn't they? 18 years of warfare. Hundreds of your ships destroyed. Entire Council fleets bogged down in a conflict that should have ended in months. Korvax's 4 eyes fixed on Jake with predatory intensity. The Terrash were eliminated. Their resistance meant nothing in the end, did it? Jake walked to the viewport again, looking out at the bustling station. Because I've been studying Council expansion patterns. After the Terrash resistance, your integration campaigns became more cautious, more diplomatic. The Council started offering better terms to new species, more autonomy, fewer demands for tribute. He turned back to face the room. The Terrash changed how you operate, even after you wiped them out. They proved that even a primitive species could make conquest so expensive that victory became meaningless. Aaron's translator produced what Jake had learned was the Zalarian equivalent of a Psi. Jake, even if your analysis is correct, what does this accomplish? Earth cannot maintain this defensive posture indefinitely. Your nuclear devices will decay. Your people will demand resources. Be redirected to other needs. Time favors the Council, does it? Jake moved to the chamber's central holographic display and activated it with gestures Aaron had taught him months ago. The three-dimensional star map showed the local galactic region, with Council territory marked in blue and frontier zones in red. Look at your expansion over the last 100,000 years, Jake said, manipulating the display to show historical boundaries. You've been slowing down. Each new integration takes longer, costs more, faces stiffer resistance. The galaxy isn't getting easier to conquer, it's getting harder. Admiral Korvax leaned forward, his massive frame dwarfing the holographic display. Temporary setbacks. The march of civilization cannot be stopped by primitive rebels. Can't. Jake highlighted several systems on the display. The Korthek Rebellion lasted 90 years before you finally broke them. The Veil Separatists are still fighting after 60 years. The Rim Coalition has been in active resistance for over a century. You're not conquering the galaxy anymore, Admiral. You're just fighting an endless series of brush wars. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of the holographic projectors. Jake watched the three alien faces or their equivalents process what he had just shown them. The Galactic Council's expansion had indeed been slowing, not because they lacked the military capacity to continue, but because each conquest required increasingly massive expenditures of resources and time. What are you proposing, Human Morrison? Aaron asked finally. Jake smiled grimly. I'm not proposing anything. I'm explaining why the Council is about to learn humanity's first contribution to galactic civilization, how to make victory so expensive that defeat becomes the smarter choice. Outside the viewport, a Council warfleet was assembling massive ships that could reduce Earth to rubble in hours. But for the first time since arriving at the station, Jake Morrison wasn't afraid, because humanity was about to teach the galaxy something it had forgotten. Sometimes the smaller dog wins by being too crazy to quit. The Council warfleet reached Earth's outer system 72 hours later, 300 ships representing the combined military might of a dozen civilizations. Jake watched their approach from the station's command center, where he had been brought to witness what Admiral Korvax called the inevitable conclusion of human stubbornness. Your fleet is impressive, Jake admitted, studying the holographic display that showed the massive vessels taking position around Earth's moon. How many ships did you send against the Terrash homeworld during their final siege? 147 vessels, Admiral Korvax replied without hesitation. More than sufficient to break any defense a primitive species could mount. And yet you've brought 300 against us, Jake observed. That suggests either humanity is twice as dangerous as the Terrash, or the Council has learned to be afraid. The Resonari delegate's crystalline form chimed with what Jake had learned was equivalent to nervous laughter. Fear is illogical. We simply prefer to avoid unnecessary casualties. Whose casualties? Jake asked. Because I doubt you're worried about human losses. The question hung in the air as the fleet began its final approach to Luna. On the tactical display, Jake could see the nuclear devices his species had scattered across the moon's surface, crude by galactic standards, but effective enough to contaminate the trilithium deposits for centuries if detonated. Admiral Korvax activated the communication system. Attention Earth vessels and lunar installations. This is Admiral Corvex of the Galactic Council Fleet. You have 60 minutes to withdraw your forces and deactivate your weapons. Failure to comply will result in the immediate seizure of your satellite and the imposition of Council authority over your system. The response came not from Earth's governments, but from an unexpected source. President Hayes himself appeared on the main display, his weathered face showing the strain of the past few days, but his eyes burning with determination. Admiral Corvex, this is Marcus Hayes, President of the United Earth Coalition. We've received your ultimatum and offer the following response. Go to hell. Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Hayes continued, his voice carrying across the void between species and civilizations. You come to our system with weapons of war, demanding we surrender our moon so you can strip mine it for your purposes. You speak of the needs of the many, while ignoring the rights of the few. You treat us like children to be ordered about rather than equals to be negotiated with. The president paused, and Jake could see the weight of speaking for his entire species settling on the man's shoulders. The people of Earth have faced extinction before. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have broken lesser species. We've clawed our way from caves to stars through determination and refusal to surrender what matters most to us. Inspiring rhetoric, Admiral Corvex muttered. But Jake noticed that none of the alien delegates were laughing now. President Hayes wasn't finished. You want our moon? Come and take it. But understand this, we've turned Luna into the most expensive piece of real estate in the galaxy. Every crater now contains enough nuclear material to make your trilithium worthless. Every mining operation you attempt will be sabotaged. Every ship you send will face desperate humans with nothing left to lose. Jake watched the tactical display as something unprecedented began to happen. Small craft were launching from Earth's surface, civilian ships, cargo haulers, converted passenger liners. Thousands of them, each carrying the same desperate cargo, volunteers willing to ram council ships if necessary. You have our answer, Admiral, President Hayes said. Luna stays where it is, or we turn it into a radioactive wasteland that will poison your mining operations for 10,000 years. And if you try to take it anyway, you'll have to go through every human in the system to do it. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Admiral Corvex stared at the tactical display where thousands of human vessels were taking position around their moon, creating a defensive screen that would require massive casualties to penetrate. This is madness, the Resonari chimed. They're threatening to destroy their own satellite rather than allow regulated mining operations. It's magnificent, Jake said quietly, and every alien eye in the room turned to him. Don't you see? This is why humanity will never be just another council. Client species. We don't calculate odds or weigh benefits against costs. When something matters to us, we fight for it regardless of consequences. Aaron's translator carried notes of genuine confusion. But Jake, this is illogical. Your moon's trilithium could fund technological advancement that would benefit your entire species. Why choose destruction over prosperity? Jake looked around the room at beings who commanded technologies that could reshape reality itself, who had conquered thousands of worlds and integrated hundreds of civilizations. They were magnificent in their power and utterly baffled by humanity's response. Because it's not about the trilithium, Jake explained. It's about the fact that you came here with weapons instead of treaties, demands instead of requests. You looked at humanity and saw resources to be exploited rather than people to be respected. He gestured toward the tactical display where the human fleet was taking defensive positions. Every one of those ships contains people who know they're probably going to die in the next few hours. They launched anyway, not because they think they can win, but because some things are worth dying for. Admiral Corvex's forearms spread in a gesture Jake had learned indicated deep confusion. But what do they hope to accomplish? Even if they resist successfully, the Council will simply return with larger fleets. This defiance serves no logical purpose. Jake smiled grimly. Admiral, you're about to learn something that will change how the Galactic Council operates for the next 1,000,000 years. The standoff lasted 16 days. For over 2 weeks. 300 Council warships faced off against thousands of human vessels around Luna, neither side willing to make the first move. The tension stretched across the solar system like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Jake spent those days in the station's diplomatic quarters, no longer a prisoner, but not quite free, serving as an unofficial intermediary between species that were discovering they understood each other far less than they had believed. The conversations that took place during those 16 days would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. Your people are dying, Admiral Corvex observed on the 14th day, reviewing reports from the human fleet. Several of the converted civilian vessels lacked proper life support for extended operations, and their crews were beginning to suffer from radiation exposure and supply shortages. They know, Jake replied, watching the tactical display where human ships maintained their defensive positions despite growing casualties. They're staying anyway. This is incomprehensible, the Resonari delegate chimed. Rational beings would have negotiated a withdrawal by now. They could request better terms, establish mining quotas, arrange for shared profits. Instead, they choose slow death in vacuum. Jake turned from the display to face the assembled delegates. Over the past 2 weeks, the station had become an impromptu diplomatic center, with representatives from dozens of Council species arriving to observe what many were calling the human anomaly. Let me tell you about the Alamo, Jake said. For the next hour, he told them about a small mission in Texas, where fewer than 200 defenders held off an army of thousands, fighting to the last man despite knowing they couldn't win. He told them about Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans delayed the Persian Empire. He spoke of Warsaw, where humans fought tanks with bottles and stones. He described Stalingrad, where an entire city became a fortress. Your species has a pattern, Aaron observed when he finished. You choose heroic defeats over pragmatic surrenders. Not defeats, Jake corrected. Victories that took longer to achieve than expected. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Corvex leaned forward, his massive frame suddenly seeming less imposing. You're suggesting these tactical defeats served strategic purposes. The Alamo fell, but Texas became independent. Thermopylae was overrun, but Greece eventually repelled the invasion. Warsaw was destroyed, but the Polish people survived. Stalingrad held, and the tide of war turned. Jake walked to the viewport, looking out at the human fleet maintaining its impossible vigil around Luna. We don't fight battles, Admiral. We fight wars. And we don't measure victory in terms of individual engagements. We measure it in terms of ultimate outcomes. Over the following days, something unprecedented began to happen. Council species started reviewing their own histories, looking for patterns they had never noticed before. The Keth examined their integration 3 centuries earlier, realizing that their supposed willing entry into the Council had actually followed a 30-year resistance campaign that had made conquest economically unfeasible. The Vorthani discovered that their own homeworld's voluntary mining agreements had been signed only after their government calculated that compliance was less expensive than the alternative. We've been telling ourselves we were bringing civilization to primitive species, Aaron said on the 15th day, her usually melodic voice carrying notes of something Jake had learned was equivalent to shame. But we were actually conquering them and calling it diplomacy. Not just you, Jake replied. Every expanding civilization does the same thing. The strong take from the weak and justify it as progress, order, or necessity. The difference is that most species eventually accept the new reality and move on. But humans don't. Humans don't. Jake confirmed. "We hold grudges. We remember injustices. We pass stories of resistance down through generations until they become legends, and legends become inspiration for the next fight." Admiral Korvex reviewed the tactical reports one more time. Human casualties are approaching 15%. Their defensive screen is degrading. We could break through their lines within hours. "You could," Jake agreed. "And then what? You'd have Luna, but you'd also have made enemies of every human in the galaxy. Forever. We don't forgive, Admiral. We don't forget, and we don't stop." The Admiral's 4 eyes fixed on Jake with an expression the human had learned to recognize as deep thought. "You're threatening a war of attrition spanning centuries." "I'm explaining why that war is inevitable if you take Luna by force," Jake corrected. "Humanity will become the galaxy's most persistent problem. Every council ship that breaks down will be sabotaged by human mechanics. Every mining operation will face mysterious accidents. Every trade route will deal with human pirates. Every council world will find itself hosting human terrorists who view themselves as freedom fighters." Jake gestured toward the viewport, where the human fleet continued its vigil. "Those ships out there, those crews who are dying to protect our moon, they're not just defending Luna, Admiral. They're defining humanity's relationship with galactic civilization. They're establishing the precedent that humans cannot be simply pushed around, that we must be negotiated with rather than commanded." "And if we withdraw?" the Resonari asked. "Then you establish a different precedent," Jake said. "That the Galactic Council respects species willing to fight for their principles. That strength isn't just measured in ships and weapons, but in determination and unity." On the 16th day, Admiral Korvex received new orders from the Council's governing body. The massive war fleet began powering down weapons and assuming non-threatening formations. 12 hours later, a single Council diplomatic vessel approached Earth, carrying the first formal treaty ever offered to humanity as equals rather than subjects. The Luna Accords, as they came to be known, established humanity's first law in space. Earth's solar system was to remain under human sovereignty, with Luna protected as a heritage site. In exchange, humanity would provide the Council with something far more valuable than trilithium: expertise in asymmetric warfare and resistance. Operations for use against the various rebel movements that had been plaguing Council space for centuries. Jake Morrison signed the treaty on behalf of humanity 6 months later, in a ceremony attended by representatives from every Council species. As he set down the stylus, he realized that the document represented more than just a peace agreement. It was recognition that humans had found their place in galactic civilization, not as subjects or clients, but as partners who brought something genuinely valuable to the table. The galaxy had learned humanity's first law: do not threaten Earth. But more importantly, they had learned the principle behind that law: some species will choose death over dishonor, and that choice makes them more dangerous than any weapon. In the years that followed, the phrase "human stubborn" became a galactic idiom meaning too persistent to defeat. Council expansion slowed dramatically as species across the galaxy realized that resistance was not only possible, but potentially successful. The great age of Council dominance was ending, replaced by something messier but more honest: a galactic community, where membership was earned through respect rather than imposed through force. And somewhere in the Outer Rim territories, on worlds that had never heard of Earth or humans, new resistance movements began using a battle cry that would echo across the stars: "Remember Luna. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of earned respect had begun."